Deidre Weinstein. I am the chair of the Balmond Area Dems, and I'm going to introduce our co-host, Gina Daly from Lantana Dems. We welcome all of you. Gina, would you like to say something? Real quick. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to see all of you coming out tonight. It's going to be a great program here, and I am on the leadership team for the Lantana. Okay. Did you hear that? Okay. So I am on the leadership team for the Lantana Area Democrats, and I'm so glad to see so many faces here tonight, and I welcome you all here, and it's going to be a great program. Thank you. I'm going to introduce our party chair. I'll give her a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our candidates that are here. They're both here and not here. At HD 63, we have, and if you'll just wave, Michelle Beckley and Denise Wooten. She's in the back there. HD 65, we have Dietrich Dubar. I don't know if he's here. HD 106, we have Dale Frey. I don't know if Papa Johnson's here or not.
I didn't see her.
I don't see her. Okay. Running for sheriff is Frederick Bishop. I consider this one of our best opportunities to replace the sheriff. All right, I'm just going to talk really loud. Good. So, and then we also have. All right. Oh, all right. There we go. Okay. And running against Dan Parker for Senate District 12 is Stephanie Gooden-Draper. I don't believe she's here either, but we do have Jan McDowell from Congress, from Congressional District 32. And we have Annette Cook, who is here for Tommy Bedford. He is running against Burgess, she and Sandy Swan have sign-up sheets, so that, so they don't have to pay the fee to run. So if you haven't signed for the sheriff or for Tommy, then please seek them out. And you want to stand up, Sandy, so they know who you are. Thanks. Yes. So please seek them out afterwards. Okay. And Delia, do you want to stand up and?
Hey, good evening, and thank you guys for coming. We are so excited to hear from the Tacketts. Denton County is the best Democratic Party in the state of Texas. I'm not sure who you're waving at, but thank y'all for coming.
I think Stephanie just walked into the room. You want to wave? This is our candidate against Dan Parker. We're going to have more about him later. Okay, so this has been a long time in the making. The first time we had Chris Tackett on, it right after COVID, it was on a video screen. I think we had like fewer than 10 people. We've been wanting to bring both Tacketts back to come talk to us. Just a little bit about them, if you don't know them. Chris Tackett started his activism with the school board as a school board trustee in Granbury. He was wondering why his representative wasn't doing anything that they wanted the school district to do. So he followed the money, and what he learned about who's controlling our Austin is really frightening and fascinating. You can't look away, but it's awful. And then Mendi has made it her life mission to expose Christian nationalism and its influence on Texas politics. Both of them have done a lot of research, so they speak from a place of knowledge and hardcore facts, born of intense investigation. So I want to welcome them. Thank you. Are they on? You can hear them. Does yours work? Nope. Make sure it works.
Maybe? Yeah.
All right. So I'm Mendi Tackett, and it's wonderful to see so many of you here. Thank you for coming out to hear the two of us. Chris, my husband, is here too. So I'm going to kind of start out with giving you guys some background about how all of this started and why we started talking to people. Back in 2014, well, let me start further back than that. Chris and I both grew up in Granbury. We graduated high school there. We moved back there in 2008 with our children. And we thought, what a great place to raise our kids. Our family was there still. And so we were active in the community. I volunteered with PTO and different things with the school. Chris ran the baseball and softball league for a few years. And in 2014, he said, I think I'm going to run for school board. And I said, I think that's a great idea. So he did run for school board. It was at that time in 2014, school board races were still supposed to be nonpartisan. And so he went to all of the local clubs and groups to speak. But he came home after visiting the Republican Club meeting one night, and he said, it was the strangest thing. The gentleman that they had as their key speaker for the evening said his entire speech was about how conservatives need to take over school boards. And that was back in 2014. And we were both like, that is really odd. It's never been partisan like that. We've never heard that before. So that was a red flag for us. Chris won his school board race and served. But after he was on the board, we started seeing some just strange things politically happening in Granbury and Hood County that we hadn't ever seen before. In 2015, there was a mom in town. She raised concern or wanted to have a book banned, a couple of them, at our public library, not the school library, but the public library. And these were a couple of LGBTQ books that were in the children's section.
They were the sweetest little children's books. They were picture books, right?
So that kind of became a thing. We had a rock star librarian who is still a friend of mine today. And she kind of led the way, and a lot of us in town organized, and we went to commissioners' meetings, and we were successful in keeping those books on the shelves back in 2015. But one of the things that we saw happening was that some of the loudest voices in town that were coming to the commissioners' meetings to speak out for banning the books were some of the local pastors, faith leaders. And we were like, that's just strange. Like, we've never seen that sort of thing happen before. There were times that Rafael Cruz was coming to town to speak.
We know Ted's dad, right?
Right, Ted's dad. There were local churches that were getting very involved politically with very distinctive messaging, and it was messaging that we just hadn't seen or heard before. And then at that point too, Chris had served on the board for a while, and the board would talk to our newly elected House rep at the time. His name was Mike Lang, and they would speak to him about these are things that we would like to see happen for public schools, or where we would request that you vote against this legislation in Austin because it's not going to help us as public schools. And every single time he voted the exact opposite of what was being requested of him or what the board was communicating. And so at that point, Chris kind of started doing a little research.
Yeah, and before I started doing the research, I wanted to touch on one or two other things that were happening in the community while I was serving on the board. And again, school board had been nonpartisan, right? Had been this thing that you served because you wanted to serve your community, not advance an ideology. And the local pastor council started taking out ads in the 2015 election, before the 2016 election, saying in the local paper, saying they were looking for conservative Christians to run for school board that could espouse these certain ideals and bring them to the board. And it was shocking to us. Dave Welch from the U.S. Pastor Council was coming to town and advising the local Chamber of Commerce on how to carry certain things forward. They were talking to There were people making the circuit around local churches talking about the Johnson Amendment being basically non-enforceable and that they should be carrying politics from the pulpit, right? And again, at this point, I think we've all seen that happening across our communities. In 2014, 2015, 2016, this was just shocking to us because it was just antithetical to what we thought all of this was supposed to be and where we thought we were moving as a community and a country, right? This is not the direction we're supposed to be going. So when Lang started voting against public education every single time, and he was telling us, no, I'm pro-public ed, right? It was like, why? Help me understand why this guy would be doing that. And I did the only thing I knew to do, which was dive into the Texas Ethics Commission and start pulling campaign finance reports. Because the only thing I could come up with is it's got to be money. Money has to be the reason why we're not being listened to. And Mike Lang was newly elected, right? Elected for the first time in 2016. And when I pulled his first chart, you see some big numbers. And if you've been to the Texas Ethics Commission and tried to pull those reports, they're not overly user-friendly. They're basically Excel or CSV files, which are Excel files. I love Excel. I geek out on it. I like my pivot tables and all those things. But it's hard to start to pull the information together because every single one of those reports, every time they have to file, it's a separate file. It doesn't consolidate it easily for you to be able to see patterns. And I pulled everything that Mike Lang had filed all the way through his election and since. And I showed it, I saw big numbers and I freaked out and I showed Mendi and
I was like, okay, because I'm not a spreadsheet person.
So it was just rows and rows and rows of data. And she was like, yeah, do something different. I can't tell what this is showing me. And so I made a pie chart.
And then I was excited.
Yeah, see? And all of a sudden, that pie chart showed that when all of the money that had gone into this guy, there were 3 big slices that made up basically 75% of the total money that this guy had taken into his race. And we were talking like $400,000, right? Was the numbers he had taken in his 2016 election set. And like 300,000 came from what looked like 3 people. And when I looked at those names, and again, I hadn't been political, I hadn't paid attention to what was going on. The biggest slice belonged to a gentleman named Ferris Wilkes, right? Fracking billionaire from Cisco, Texas. The next biggest slice was this group that I had never heard of called Empower Texans. And then the one after that was a gentleman named Tim Dunn. And so 75% was coming from those 3, at that point, I thought, unrelated individuals. And it was like, okay, well, that's the answer, because we're not one of those 3 people or entities. That's why we don't get listened to, because that's who's making sure he gets reelected. So I took my new fancy pie chart and I posted it on Facebook, because that's what you do when you find cool things, or at least that's what you did in 2016, 2017, right? And talked about it. And I put it on Twitter and other places. And people around the state were like, okay, the thing you're talking about that you saw with your rep, the not hearing you at all, I'm seeing that too. Can you make a pie chart for me? So I did. I started doing them for people in races all over the state. And it got to where I was like, okay, I've got to get out of Excel because this is killing me. And migrated, and then I took on the incredibly stupid and challenging thing of, at this point, and I'm still doing it today, so whatever I'm talking about, you can absolutely go find it. I ripped the entire Texas Ethics Commission database, and I drop it into a website that makes pie charts. for like every single state level race. You can get to it. The website I had been using was christackettnow.com. It still gets you there. It's not the most pretty site. And I'll talk about another way you can get there that has even more cool information among other things we're going to talk about in just a little bit. But when you start to pull all the money, or at least money from races all over the state, now the real patterns start to show up. All of a sudden, this gentleman, Ferris Wilks, this PAC, Empower Texans, and this gentleman, Tim Dunn, you start to see them show up on a whole bunch of other people's pie charts. And when you start to then consolidate, where are all these people going, you realize, okay, Wilks and Dunn were the primary donors to Empower Texans, right? And so those were really all the same ideology pushing things. And then it's like, well, where else are Wilks and Dunn giving? And you start to find all these other political action committees that they're the primary funders for, giving millions of dollars. Texas Right to Life, Texas Homeschool Coalition, Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, Constituents Focus. I mean, literally all of this whole entire web of political action committees. And we've all, when we go through an election season, you know the way your mailbox and your Facebook feed and Twitter feed and everything else just gets inundated with political ads, right? You may be getting 6, 8, 10, 12 mailers a day showing up. And you people, you're on it, right? You know who the good ones are and who the folks that are like, yeah, I'm never going to support them. But there's a ton of low information voters out there who will hear the name over and over. And if it was only coming from the candidate every time saying, hey, vote for me, they might go. But when you see 6, 8, 10 different groups all endorsing the same candidate, you go, well, there must be something here, right? And so maybe you tip into, I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to vote that way. And that's what was happening, right? They were taking what was a handful of billionaire oligarchs, were creating this web of not only political action committees, but also nonprofit organizations that they would sit on the board of, that they were also influencing, who were also sending you mailers, not about candidates, but about issues, and it's the same issues that the candidates were pushing. And that's all dark money because it doesn't actually get reported to the candidate.
So it makes it look like it's grassroots, and it's not grassroots at all.
It's a handful of voices creating AstroTurf, right? That's truly what was happening. And look, the good news is, we started making a lot of noise about Empower Texans and Wilks and Dunn.
Not just us, but people across
Yeah, people
the state.
in general, right?
Yeah.
We were a tiny bit of the noise, right? But I mean, other people started talking about it. And in the 2018 elections, Empower Texans got their clock cleaned, right? I mean, they lost and lost bad in almost every election. And we thought they're done, right? Because I mean, if you're in this game for money and power, and you lose a lot of your money and you don't grab the power you want, at some point you step away from the table, right? No. And you say, I'm done. And a lot of us were wondering, will they be done? And then Mendi started digging a little further.
So Chris mentioned that Rafael Cruz was coming to town. We had Dave Welch, who was the U.S. Pastor Council leader, come to town. We had some local churches giving some pretty questionable, in our opinion, sermons, going into like Seven Mountains Dominionism and whatnot. And I was listening to these sermons that Rafael Cruz was giving in town. And he was telling the congregations that separation of church and state is a myth. He was telling people that public schools were indoctrinating children. He was just, putting out all this nonsensical information. And So then we also began to see, aside from what was happening locally, we started to see some bills popping up that were, y'all remember we saw the bathroom bill, the CRT stuff, as of late had popped up. We had all these attacks on public educators beginning to creep up. There was the In God We Trust bill that came up.
The first time.
And Chris and I knew from some of the research we had started doing based on what we were seeing happening locally, that In God We Trust bill was part of what's called, it's a bill mill playbook basically called Project Blitz. And we knew as soon as we saw it, that's straight from Project Blitz. And if you looked at the bill that was filed in Austin, and you looked at what was written by the folks who do Project Blitz, who are not right here in Texas necessarily, it was word for word verbatim. So we made copies and drove to Austin and of the Project Blitz playbook. And we went to Austin, and we didn't get to meet with legislators themselves, but we met with a lot of their staff members. And nobody knew what we were talking about. We could have shown up from Mars and been equally as, understood.
I'm sure as we met with some of the staff and we're like talking about, this is Christian nationalism, this is this playbook that's trying to, again, push an ideology across 50 states, they thought we were from Mars,
yeah.
Right? I mean, this idea that, what are you talking about?
Right. And so, anyway, we had been watching these things happen locally, statewide, and we were digging everywhere and reading everything we could to figure out what is this that we're seeing, right? And we did know at that point, this is Christian nationalism. So to kind of stop right there, the first thing I want to do is give a disclaimer as we talk about Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism does not represent all Christians. It does not represent all churches, and it doesn't represent probably anyone in this audience. So there is nothing personal when we talk about Christian nationalism. It's not representative of Christianity. So we always want to be sure that we're saying that so everybody understands and doesn't misunderstand what we're talking about. I'm going to give you the definition that Amanda Tyler uses. She's with the BJC and Christians Against Christian Nationalism. If you're not familiar with their organization, I would highly recommend you look them up online. They have invaluable information, and Amanda is here in Texas now as their head organizer. She's been in DC, but at any rate, her working definition of Christian nationalism is a political ideology and a cultural framework that seek to merge Christian and American identity. In other words, Christian nationalists believe that if you're going to be a good American, you have to be the right kind of Christian with a certain kind of Christian ideology and outlook, right? Some very narrow-minded thinking. If you're going to be a good Christian, you need to hold certain political views that align with these super conservative, very narrow views, right? Christian nationalism also seeks to elevate and privilege Christianity over all other faith traditions or those who are, or nuns, those who don't subscribe to a faith tradition. So the whole idea of Christian nationalism is that, you're basing laws and policy and your elected officials are all coming out of this very specific and narrow Christian ideology that also plays into the political realm. And that's not American, that's not democracy, that's not what we do. That doesn't, our Constitution speaks very plainly to the contrary, that's not what we do. So as I was going to some of these voter engagement events, I was listening very closely, and then Chris and I just began to try to, between the money and the information that we had gained from experts that have been studying this for a really long time, amazing people, we were trying to do everything we could to jump up and down wave our hands and make as much noise as we could, because we knew this is happening in Texas. It's happening in local communities and it's happening statewide. And one of the areas that we saw the evidence the most was in public education, the attacks on public education. And we advocate a lot for public education. There's a lot of issues that go into Christian nationalism, but we do a lot of focus on public ed. And we have seen, I mentioned a while ago, we had seen all of these different kinds of bills popping up, and the folks on the far right, and the Wilkes and Tim Dunn and multiple other people who are in their realm of donors, subscribe to Christian nationalist ideology, and that's what they seek that's what they want for our entire state. And we could see that the money was translating to attacks on public education. They started with bathroom bills. They were bad-mouthing teachers. We got the bathroom bills, and the initial transgender bills didn't work. They went to CRT scare, right, and said, history's being taught wrong, and so on and so forth. And now we're at library books. And, we ended up with a library book situation in our public school in Granbury ISD as well last year. But the public education part of it is really important, and it's one of the areas that you can see the most evidence in the state of Texas, because they want vouchers.
And I'm wearing my shirt tonight about vouchers, so we'll touch on that in a minute. But yeah, the attack on public education hits close to us, right? I mean, I served on the school board in the public school system. We were both public school kids.
Families taught in public school.
So, I mean, it's this idea that it is the foundation of our democracy, right? This is where any kid from anywhere can go to a public school, get not only an education, but learn how to be a good human with others who are different, to learn how to be successful out in the world, right? Public schools are so much more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? There is a huge cultural element where you have to learn how to deal with difference. And when you think about public schools broadly, there's been disinformation campaigns about the effectiveness of public schools that have gone on for generations, right? And public schools aren't perfect, right? I'm going to say that, up front. They're not perfect. There's things we should be doing to make them better and continue to work. And when you poll nationally and you ask people, what do you think of public education, right? Is it favorable, unfavorable, whatever? It's usually polling favorable in the mid-40s, right? That's the number you see when you talk about public education at large. But then when you ask the question about what do you think about your kid's school, right? Your local district, all of a sudden that number historically jumps up into the high 70s, low 80s, favorable. So this idea of they're failing, it's this broad narrative that's out there. It's not my school, because I know my school. I know how great the teachers are that my kids are dealing with. I've gone to those parent-teacher conferences. I've been on the PTO. We know there's no indoctrination in our school. We know these people. We see them in our community. They're good folks. We believe in our public schools. So when you think about vouchers in Texas, when your goal is to gut the public education system, when you see polling up in the high 70s, low 80s for public schools, it's hard to convince people to say we need to blow it up, that we need to go do something different. So what do you do to make those numbers go down? You gaslight, you push propaganda, you force this narrative that schools are scary places.
And you underfund them.
You do that too, right? All of that becomes almost a doom loop, right? It's this perpetual cycle of, well, they're failing because of this, and it's because we're not doing these things, or we're creating this situation where they can't succeed. So now the next scary thing happens. Or you start claiming there's porn in libraries and teachers are trying to indoctrinate kids and Marxism and LGBTQ agendas and all these things, right? And then when you're underfunding and you're not paying teachers what they're worth, right? And the great ones start to leave the profession. And now it's this doom loop of where you're at. And now, all of a sudden, that high 70, low 80 number starts to, in the community, come down a little bit. People who've always been in favor of public education start to say, maybe if I had an option, I'd go somewhere else, right? That's what these folks are banking on as we're in our fourth special session talking about vouchers right now. And the reality is, when you talk about vouchers, you have to understand the root of where vouchers are really coming from, right? In 1954, Brown v. Board of Education came down from the Supreme Court, desegregating schools. Immediately after that, Milton Friedman, noted economist, right, starts advocating that maybe we need to take, the public money out of public schools and just give it to parents in the forms of vouchers so that they can take money and go to the school of their choice. And he acknowledged in 1955 that Brown v. Board had occurred recently and said, if we give them all their money and they end up with all white schools, that's their choice, and that's okay. If they're going to religious schools, that's okay. We'll let the market decide, and if people are really against segregated schools, then the market will adjust and we'll have desegregated schools. That's when the voucher push started. Segregation academies popped up all over the South and persisted for decades. And it was, so much of it was about race and racism. It was also about religion and the desire to indoctrinate kids. To do the thing they're accusing public schools of doing is really their agenda. And then the other element in all of this, it's the money, right? Somebody's making a profit. So when we think about, and you follow the money, right? And you start to look at all of the people who are funding the agenda against our public schools, and they're the same ones driving the agenda against the LGBTQ community. They're the same ones driving the agenda trying to create this narrative about illegal immigration. They're the same ones driving the agenda, trying to continue to erode choice. Not that there's much choice left, right, with where we're at. They love national bans, right? The same people, when you start to look at the money behind it, it's the same people driving all of these things, driving this same broad ideology. But when you look at the individual billionaire and the individual oligarch, those pushing into the voucher space, and it's Wilkes and it's Dunn, and it's people like Richard Weekley, who runs Texans for Lawsuit Reform, and some of his cronies. H. Ross Perot plays in some of these places and things like that. The individual billionaire may hit 1, 2, or all 3 of these buckets I've got on my shirt. And my shirt's vouchers, their choice since 1954. Because it is, right? It's the desire to segregate, indoctrinate, or line somebody's pockets. That's why they're pushing vouchers. Now, individual parents will make decisions for vouchers on their individual circumstance. So when I'm talking about vouchers, I'm not talking about the people who take them necessarily, but it's more about those who are driving that agenda of their necessary. In November of 2021, Kevin Roberts, who was the CEO at the time of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which The Texas Public Policy Foundation is affiliated with the broader Koch network of things, right? And they're a policy shop. So when Wilkes and Dunn were trying to get people elected with Empower Texans and all their money, they were counting on the Texas Public Policy Foundation to write the policies that they would try and pass, right? Oh, and by the way, Tim Dunn is the vice chairman of the Texas Public Policy Foundation and has been since 2008. But in 2021, Kevin Roberts wrote a letter, a fundraising letter, that spelled out what the agenda was going to be against public schools in this next election and the next legislative cycle. Talked about the Marxism that was taking over our schools. Talked about the LGBTQ agenda, the broad indoctrination and Marxism that was happening every single day in our classrooms, and the need to elect people who would allow this educational freedom to occur so that those poor kids could escape all of that. Right? Vouchers. They were driving for vouchers from that moment. Now, the TPPF CEO has now gone on to become the CEO of the Heritage Foundation. And they have a whole plan for 2025 should the wrong people win the national election. Do what?
Project 2025.
That's it, right? So this idea and the attacks that we're seeing on public education today, they go way back, right? They're all part of a broader play to grab control of systems. No, it's all good.
That's okay.
We ready to rock and roll? All right, here we go. So, I want to get to questions, right? So that we can address the things, at least as best we can, that you guys may have. But look, I want to just, closing thought. It is all connected, right? So, I mean, public education is the fight we're fighting in the legislature right now. Immigration is being fought, right? All of these things. The thing to remember as we're talking about Christian nationalism and Seven Mountains dominionism, which is, I'm not going to get into that tonight, but that's like the...
But they go hand in hand.
That is the engine that drives Christian nationalism, okay?
Yeah.
But this idea that all of these things that all of you in this room, right, the things that we mobilize and we go fight, right? It may be choice that we all show up and we march and we go, yeah, and we fight back. And it's, hey, we're going to show up and rally for public education on the Capitol steps, right? Because they're attacking this next, right? When I think about what we see happening is we have this beautiful green lawn and we have a weed that pops up, right? And we all mobilize and we run and we go pull the weed. And then the next weed pops up and we go over and pull that one. But the reality is we're going to continue pulling those weeds until we figure out there's a root to the rot. And the root to the rot's Christian nationalism. Okay? Once we can get enough people understanding that all of these things we're fighting against come from the same place, that's when we start to turn the tide. And the thing that I've used as my mantra lately, and Buddy's here, so he likes when I use this mantra, is look, what we're striving for is we want you to be able to see what it is that's happening, right? And once you see it, you got to call it what it is. It's Christian nationalism. That is what is attacking our democracy right now. And once you can see it, once you can name it, then you're ready to fight it. So see it, name it, fight it. That is what all of this is about. And that's why Mendi and I show up at things like this to talk to people, to help you understand what's going on, to arm you with at least a few talking points that you can go out, see it in your community, call it what it is, and then go fight it. Because it's going to take all of us to fight back against the oligarchs who are trying to impose all of this on us. Okay.
Yeah.
Questions? Let's go.
Yes, sir.
All right, the bill's in special session right now for vouchers.
Mhm.
You know, they're real big on accountability and teaching to the test and all the testing. Who's gonna test these kids that are homeschooled? Who's gonna test the kids that are?
They're not.
Is there any permission in there for that?
There's not elements in the bills thus far. I mean, it is one of those, you know, of course, as we go through a legislative process, there's opportunities to put forth amendments, but there's also lots of opportunity for those to be voted down or stripped out or whatever. Look, the idea is they don't want accountability, right? Because when you look at studies broadly in states that have rolled out broadly vouchers and things like that, the kids don't do better, right? In very small focused groups, right? You may see some elevation in overall performance, but there's lots of studies out there at this point that show as voucher programs, ESAs, whatever you want to call them, right? As they go broader and more kids start to take it, there is a knowledge gap that starts to show up. They're not performing better than the public schools. And as soon as you drive that accountability, as soon as you drive, you have to test as a requirement to get the voucher, all of a sudden now that's strings attached. And it's actually in the GOP platform that they want vouchers with no strings attached.
That's 5 kids, and you got, what, 50K?
Basically. Yep.
Yes, go
Question in the
ahead.
back?
Oh,
sorry.
Delia had her hand up, we'll go. Go ahead.
What is the end game? So.
Can you take the microphone over?
I'm asking, what is the end game? In 1954, we know that after the Brown v. Board, they wanted to not desegregate. Is the end game to create a society of people who don't think about like the 1800s, where women don't have rights? I mean, what is the, and because as you mentioned, public education is the cornerstone of democracy. So are they trying to just create workers who don't, I mean, what is the end game?
I haven't thought that.
Well, I would say, especially if you look at our new Speaker of the House, and you listen to some of the things that he has said, and all of these folks who fall into the same hardline Christian nationalist ideology he has. Yes, they are looking for a conservative Christian driven nation where they're choosing what we learn and don't learn. They're choosing what we read and don't read. They're choosing what people know. They're choosing what rights we have. They're choosing, who has an elevated voice and who doesn't have an elevated voice. It is a very, narrow-minded, narrow-visioned, hierarchical, authoritarian vision. That is what they want, and that is their end game. They don't want LGBTQ people to have rights, period, end of story. They don't want men or women to have reproductive rights, end of story. And public schools are a place where people learn to think critically. They don't want people to think critically. They want to tell you what it is you should think and how to interpret it and the kind of information that you're going to be allowed to be exposed to and the kind of history that you're going to learn, their version of history, right? So that's really their end game.
It's scary stuff.
So I guess my question is, I used to teach, so I can maybe we could have people line up and then walk
they're looking at passing a school voucher law amendment, whatever you want to call it, right now. I'm sure that almost everyone in this room has at least written every one of their representatives telling them that they are 100% against it. And I know that we probably all know 10 or 15 people who feel that way. So we know that there is, I guess, a silent majority who do not want this to happen, but yet, because the money is where the money is, it's going to happen. I mean, how do we not let that happen, I guess is my question. And it's a small majority of the Christian these Christian nationals. I mean, it's such a small majority, but that's all we hear about. I mean, it's so almost overwhelming to a point where like you're frozen into not acting because you feel like there's nothing that you can do to stop it from happening.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is when people start to pay attention too late, the horse is out of the barn, right? We've got the elected people in Austin who are representing us, right? Well, they're not, but as a society, we have allowed those people to receive a majority of those who voted in the last election set. Now, look, there is a coalition of basically every Democrat and like 20 some odd Republicans who are against the vouchers. I won't say they're pro-public education because they'll vote against the LGBTQ community and those kids are in the schools. They'll vote against the transgender kids. They'll do all of these. They'll ban books. They'll do all of that. So they're not pro-public ed, but they're at least anti-voucher, right? Now, the amount of pressure that is being leveraged on those lawmakers is ridiculous, right? I mean, we're in the fourth special session because the governor won't take no for an answer, and the lieutenant governor won't take no for an answer.
We do not want this.
But the thing is, he just got reelected, and the people who gave him the money said, this is where we want to go. Right? And that's, look, I will say, continue to call and try and reinforce the message. But the thing we have to do is make sure we aren't getting lost in where we got to go. And we have got to get different people in Austin. That is the only way this gets different. We may lose the fight today, right? But if we get the right people in place, we can make sure we win tomorrow.
So one of the things you have to realize is they want us to think we have no chance. And they've been playing the long game for a long time, and we're in catch-up mode. And so you cannot get discouraged. You have to keep you have to push, but you have to get involved. The last election was the first time I got involved. Because the previous time, when Trump was going up against Hillary, I thought there's no way in heck America would elect Trump. I was wrong, and so I got involved. We have some wonderful people. They need resources. They need money. I didn't even know what a phone dialer was, but that allows a politician to reach so many more people, but it costs money. And so we need to get involved, we need to donate, and we need to not ever lose our hope. Delia, that's up there, put together a heck of a team. They did a lot of good work. We also need candidates that will work their butts off. Not candidates that just want to put their name out there and maybe knock on a few doors. We need folks that will knock on every flipping door. There are more of us with sanity than the insane folks, but we have to show up.
Well, and I want to follow up on what he just said, because everything he just said is absolutely right. There are more of us, period, end of story. And I know a lot of people go back and forth on is Texas purple or is it whatever. There are a lot of us. And we absolutely, once we all get going in the same direction and get enough of us going, can turn the state. We can. And the hopeful thing that I will say to all of you, and Chris will concur, when we first started talking about all this a few years ago, people did look at us like we were crazy. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it's cost us some relationships. It cost us, the way people thought of us in our town. But we kept saying it. And there wasn't anybody in the media at the time, other than the experts that we were going and hunting out, at universities that have been writing about this, some journalists and whatnot. There wasn't anybody talking about Christian nationalism. It is something a lot of people know about now. Like, the word is out, and people don't look at us like we're crazy anymore. People get it. So the hopeful thing is the media talks about it. You can walk up to somebody and carry on a conversation, and more than likely they have some kind of idea as to what you're talking about. And so we just have to keep talking about it, and we have to encourage people not just register to vote, go to the polls and actually vote, because that is really where we have our problem. We're low voter turnout, and we have to get people to show up to the voting booth and cast their vote against Christian nationalism and against authoritarianism.
I will concur with pushing people for our next election. We have several candidates here, or representatives from candidates. Please support them. There are going to be huge repercussions from 2024. And we also still have several seats that we do not have a candidate on our side running for. So do your research, ask the questions. Is somebody running in my district? And get some help on how to go about that process. The deadline to file for the ballot is December 11th, creeping up on us very soon. But I did want to ask a question. Okay. If you'll talk ever so briefly about dominionism.
Sure. We'll touch on it quickly. Seven Mountains Dominionism, right? I said it's the engine that drives Christian nationalism. It is what people like David Barton, who runs an organization called Wall Builders, false historian, has the ear of the new Speaker of the House, right? Told him he looked up to him and learned so much from him. People like Lance Wallnau, Rafael Cruz, who we've talked about earlier, all subscribe to this idea of Seven Mountains Dominionism. And the idea is, it's an end times theology, okay? It's this idea that there are seven mountains, or seven pillars is what you'll hear it called sometimes, of society. And until you can gain control of those mountains, Christ will not return. But once you can gain dominion, and that's why it's called dominionism, over each of those mountains, that will allow end times to come. Now, the seven mountains, it's the church, and they'll tell you, oh yeah, we've always played there, but the church should be outside the four walls. It should be out in the community, right? So that's what their church is one. Family is the second mountain. And that's this one man, one woman. It's where all the anti-LGBTQ stuff comes from. The third mountain is education. And that's where taking over the public school systems. And if you can't take it over, you break it.
We had a chaplain bill here in Texas just passed.
Yep.
Oh yeah, the chaplain bill, right?
Yeah.
We can replace school counselors with chaplains that got 48 hours worth of training from a Focus on the Family program. Seriously. So education is 3. Government is 4, because they know they have to seize control of levers of power at all levels. Right? National, state, and local. Because they can pass the laws that now impose the ideology. It's arts and entertainment. They're not very good at that one yet, but they're sure trying. I mean, look, they had the child trafficking movie, right? Which was run and funded by Christian nationalist people, right? Arts and entertainment, there's the media. And if you've seen the Daily Wire, with like Ben Shapiro and some of those other horrible folks that are on it, it's owned by Ferris Wilks. When you heard groups like Prager University, which is it's a YouTube thing, right? All the videos, not really a university, that apparently Florida has adopted some of their curriculum, Oklahoma has, Texas was rumored to have, but not quite. Julie Pickering jumped the gun a little bit there. But that was seed funded by Ferris Wilks too, right? So all of these people, these billionaires, plenty and lots of these spaces, so media is one, they want their own ecosystem where they can control what's there. And then the last one's business, because they know they need money to make it go. Those are the 7 mountains. And this idea that once you gain control of all of them, that's when you take the nation. That's dominionism. And that's scary stuff.
Viktor Orban has done this in Hungary.
Yeah. I mean, Orban is held up as like this model that they should be following.
And it's how you watch a democracy die. If you Google CNN Wilkes Dunn, they did an episode on this called Deep in the Pockets of
That was me.
We were in it.
Very good. Terrifying, very good.
I'll say, CNN called me and said, we want to talk about money in Texas. What can we do? So, they went and found all the good people. There are a bunch of good people to talk to. But I gave them that story.
Yeah, tell us the name of the story again.
Deep in the Pockets of Texas. Deep in the Pockets of Texas. And you can Google it, and it'll go to Chris's YouTube page, and you can watch the whole thing.
Or you can go to seeit, and there's a link to the video there too.
And just one more quick thing on the 7 mountains dominionism and the taking nations and whatnot. They're not just working on the U.S., folks. I mean, Ferris Wilks' brother-in-law travels. He's got a church out in West Texas too, and he travels to other countries and visits with other national leaders. I mean, this isn't just a United States thing. And you're right, Hungary has already gone down this road. This is just, and it's kind of ick, like you don't really want to think about that, but you do kind of need to have a general idea of there's a bigger goal for these people.
And that's why they didn't go away in 2018, right? That's why they came back, because it wasn't just money and power, it's ideology. That's what's driving it.
I'm from New Jersey, and most people in New Jersey actually get out and vote. And when I moved here, I couldn't believe the lack of information. When votes are, how do you vote, where do you go? It's just not available. You have to search for it yourself. You have to get on the internet. You have to find it. When I lived in New Jersey, the League of Women Voters sends you a sample ballot, and it also explains the questions. You know how they're all like worded so that you can vote for it? They actually explain what it means. And everybody who votes gets that. Each person. So like my husband got one and I got one, so you can take it with you when you go vote. And we voted in our neighborhood. We could actually walk to where we voted. So we didn't have to get in a car to go vote. We could just walk to it. And there was never a line. So voting was easy. Voting was in your face. You got a whole sheet, big, huge sheet of the ballot, and it explained it. So that it was a no-brainer. You didn't have to get on the internet and research. A lot of people don't have time to do that.
But understand, the number of polling places and making it hard to vote, that's all by design. The people in power, I mean, I'll go back to Paul Weyrich in 1980, speaking in Dallas, Texas to a group of conservative evangelical leaders. He said, our leverage in elections goes up when fewer people vote. So we want to make sure our people vote, and it's hard for other people, right? So the way you see, now it's not to say that we don't have League of Women Voters and they're doing a lot of good work and we're doing lots of things to try and educate, but you don't have the broader mechanisms of the state working to make voting and a culture of voting something that is desired. Oh yeah. You can take the mic and say that. But so we are working against the system inside that space. I mean, that's why we don't have campaign finance reform and people can write $1 million checks because the people in power like the $1 million checks. We actually had representatives, Aaron Zveener tried to get a couple of different amendments onto a Charlie Geren bill that would cap contributions, that would force all local elections to actually file with the Texas Ethics Commission so we could see all the money. And they were like, no, we don't want that. We don't want that, right? So the way the system works here is by design. And until we show up and overwhelm the system, it's not going to change. Yeah.
To keep the question brief, also the answer.
Let us deal with the elephant in the room. Moms for Liberty. Conspiring with teachers to have students check out books that they know will probably get banned or already banned but still doing it. How do we keep that from happening?
Well, we have to acknowledge that there's the books that are in our public schools may not be somebody's cup of tea, right? It may touch on subjects that people are uncomfortable with. But when I look and I talk to kids that are in high school, the things they are seeing everywhere else in the world, I would much rather them be seeing it and learning it in a book rather than seeing somewhere else. Because when they talk about the books and porn being in books or the things they're trying to ban, right? It's this idea that they're taking passages out of books. Out of context or out of the full realm of the story, right? The idea that, look, what is happening now and the reason why groups like the ACLU and others haven't been able to effectively challenge these bans, and they are bans no matter what these, you can still buy it at the store. It's being banned from the school, come on. But the reason they're not challenging those things is our court system has been infected. Because we didn't show up and vote enough, and the people who got in power put people on the bench who will now side with those who want to ban books, right? And so challenging book banning as it goes up through the system, the people who in the ACLU and Penn America and all those who are doing everything they can to fight back, they know if it goes to court and gets to the Supreme Court, they lose. And those books get banned permanently everywhere rather than just a couple of districts. So it takes our voices showing up at school board meetings, supporting our school board members who are saying those books stay, supporting our librarians, trusting the expertise that they're actually curating a collection appropriately, and you show up and you make noise. Because we talked about they're the minority, right? And they're so loud. When we don't talk, we cede ground to them. We let them control a narrative. And we can't do that. It's not easy. It's uncomfortable showing up and raising your voice. But we've all got to get better at it.
You led right into what I wanted to say. I'm Michelle Chandler. I'm the vice chair of recruiting for the club for the Southern Area Democrats. And this is a call to action, guys. What we have to do is do what I'm doing all the time, which is messaging everybody saying, hey, we've got a club here. We get together on a regular basis. We spend time with each other. We've got happy hour. We have 2 book clubs. We have all kinds of things going on, service projects. We get together and have wine with our neighbors. We have lunch before we go vote so everyone can ask questions. Jennifer and I hosted a ton of moms that were bipartisan. They had no idea about the bond coming up, the state amendments. So what I'm saying is you guys reach out to me on Facebook or my email, get my phone number. I'll send you whatever information you need to do to help me recruit our friends, family, and neighbors, because this is a call to action. What we have to do is leave this meeting and say, those of us in this room already know what's going on. It's the people that don't know what's going on that we have to reach. You have to reach out to your neighbors, family members, people that you think we can cross the aisle to. We cannot isolate ourselves anymore. We've got to work together in the community. So I'm Michelle Chandler. I'm the Vice Chair of Recruiting. Please connect with me or any of our other leadership members so we can get the ball moving forward.
My name's Denise Wooten. I'm running for HD 63. And my question to you all is messaging. So Michelle, you led right into what I want to talk about, which is, can you please give us some input about, everyone in this room is politically involved. These are our block walkers. These are our volunteers. I'm going to be producing literature. What have you found to be the most effective messaging? What are the words? What are the media modalities that you suggest? Could you give us as candidates and as politically involved volunteers some input on that? Thank you.
We got a question for me. Look, there's a huge education component, right, that you have to be able to get across to voters to understand what they're dealing with, right? As Democrats, I think in large part it's been a message of, look, we can't focus on the scary things. Let's focus in the message of where we're trying to go. It's not about attacking the other candidate, but I think it is walking a line between what your strategy is for where we can go and understand what could happen if we're not paying attention and electing the right folks, right? It is finding that sweet spot in between, because if we keep doing the thing we've always done, we're going to continue to get the same overall result, which is not winning in too many races, right? So it is, and I'll say, look, I saw, well, I was listening to Pod Save America the other morning and listening to a representative from Louisiana. And she was like, look, our party's been telling us this whole time, we got to go find the moderate white people so they can vote for us, right? And she's like, look, there are no more moderates. Those people who were moderates, they're voting for Trump. And she was like, we have to connect with the people who aren't voting.
Embrace the progressive message.
And see, you should have had this microphone. And embrace the progressive message, because that is the thing that helps connect. When we talk about being a non-voting state, finding those people who have checked out of the system. It's going, and it may, look, we have 2 kids, 23 and 19. And they vote every time because we're like, you're going to vote, right? But we know they're friends, and even our kids sometimes go, but what is it going to matter? And it's like, if we don't show up, if your generation doesn't show up, you agree with all the things we're advocating for. We just need enough of you and your voices to help us get there. Look, if you look at the 2022 election and you focus on 11 counties that were blue and getting bluer, the 11 biggest counties, or some of the biggest counties in the state, and we bump turnout in those spaces, Greg Abbott's not the governor, right? When we talk about the next 11 counties that are red, but getting more blue. If we invest in, and again, there's some of the biggest in the state. Tarrant County is like right there on the edge, right? But we invest in those spaces. There were so many people who didn't vote in those counties. You run this state. And it's not going to be flipping R's to D's. It's going to get people who believe in our progressive message to believe in the candidates, the people in this room, to say, I'm going to show up and I'm going to vote for them because they're speaking to me. That's how we get there, I think. But that's not a phrase or a slogan, so. But that's at least a theme.
All right. Oh, right here. Sorry. So Dale Frey running for HD 106, but I also want to do my own homework too. So let me ask you, how is it that Wilkes and Dunn primarily funds their targets? Is it directly or is it more so through PACs? I think I'm aware of the Defend Texas Liberty PAC, but what other PACs should we be looking for and following?
Well, I want to say Wilkes and Dunn are important, right? And Defend Texas Liberty is absolutely where they went. And over the last 2 years, we talk about it, we talk about Empower Texans and how big and a big bad wolf they were. The money that's going into Defend Texas Liberty in the last 2 years versus what went in the entire time Empower Texans PAC existed, it's equal, right? So they pushed so much more money in the last 2 years to Defend Texas Liberty. So that's scary. But the thing is, it's not just Wilkes and Dunn. That's the thing you got to be careful with. It's easy to fall into this trap of there's two big bad guys behind the curtain. Now, what they've done is they've created a model that others are following, right? I liken it to somebody doing a cannonball into the deep end of a swimming pool, right? They made a big splash with Empower Texans. And what we're dealing with now, even more, not just at the state level, at the local level, right? Or more local races, others who may not have the same billions but carry the same ideology, they're investing heavily. So the thing you've got to watch for is just significant donations going in anywhere to an opponent, right? It's looking at those campaign finance reports, understanding what's actually coming from in the district versus outside the district, and where are the big checks coming from? Because as soon as you start to see a big check, and you can go to my website and look, because I'm ripping all the reports every time, is start to say, where else are they giving? And when you start to see it connected to multiple candidates, and you start to understand what those candidates are about, it becomes very easy to see where the Christian nationalism or the ideology broadly is pushing.
Tell us your website.
See it, name it, fight it.com. That's the easiest one. You can get all of the stuff from there.
Oh, is it fight it or say it?
Fight it. See it, name it, fight it. Because I don't want you to just say it. I want you to go fight it. Wherever you can.
Sorry.
We take the last two questions.
Last two.
I'm going to change the direction that we're going a little bit. When you talk about communism, you're talking about government. So I come from a really small town up here in North Texas, 3,200 people. Mm-hmm. And we've got this going on in a municipal level. Mm-hmm. We've got Monty Bennett, a major benefactor of our town council right now. The people are sitting on it. We have Matt Krause coming in. He has a new tool, folks. It's called the Texas Government Accountability Association. And he is trying to take over control of our municipal governments with this. He wants to take the place of TML, which all of our municipalities rely on for governance. Pardon me? Yes, ma'am. We just went through this. We had to deal with Aaron Harris. We had to deal with Matt Armstrong, True Texas Project, and Jill Glover, Grassroots Project, We the People, bringing this into our town, creating a political action committee with 32 people, 100 in our town. A political action committee. And Chris is right. It opened a door that can't be closed. The question is, how can we stop it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just comes back to those of you have to do the very best you can to coordinate and organize as many of the 3,200 in your community as possible to say, we're not going to elect people that they're backing, right? They're kind of trying to do the same thing with TASB, right? They want to, statewide, they want to get rid of TASB and install their own Christian nationalist driven school board association to advise and inform school boards. So we're going to see this at local community level, state level. And again, it just comes back to educate and mobilize as many people within your community as you can to ensure that the people they're backing who would make policy once elected to move these things, right, don't get elected in the first place. Or if they're there now, it's their last term. It really comes down to whether it's at a local level or at the state level, or we're going to see again in a national level, the fight, who's in office, because the people that hold those offices are going to be the people who are making the rules and the decisions that the rest of us are having to live with. So, last question.
Hi, I'm Sandy Parker. I usually don't need these things, but we were talking about messaging, and you say we got to fight the Christian nationalism, this. When I think back to what we managed to do with the Affordable Care Act and knock that just flat off of their platform, when I would talk to people, and if I use the term Obamacare, this is what I got. I got a wall. But when I said the Affordable Care Act, that's like, I mean, when I walk up to somebody and I say, well, I want to talk to you about Christian nationalism, I'm going to get a wall because of the word Christian. I'm going to be against that. Last time, defund the police, I thought just broke us because it was, and it's just the message.
But here's what you can do with that. And we totally understand, because when we started talking about Christian nationalism, we got a lot of talk to my hand, I don't want to talk to you, right? You're attacking my religion personally. But here's the thing. We have asked the experts that we have become acquainted with and we have a relationship with, we've asked them multiple times, is there some other word that we could use that's more palatable? There isn't. You gotta call it what it is, and it is Christian nationalism. Now, understanding a working definition so you can hold a conversation and not be attacking somebody, but just inform them. What does that term really mean, right? That's really important. So everybody in this room, like, go, and here's a couple of groups here in Texas, and I mentioned one of them before, that are faith-based groups that you can say, let me tell you about my friends at. The first one is the BJC, the Baptist Joint Committee, and they have an entire initiative called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Amanda Tyler is the person that heads up that organization. She used to be at DC. She's just recently moved back down here to Texas. They have fabulous messaging, lots of resources. Go online, Google them.
Say the name again.
BJC is the acronym, I guess, and it's Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And then the other group that I'm going to tell you, and Chris will tell you, to get to know about, and they have messaging as well, especially for public education, that's their focus, is Pastors for Texas Children. Okay. Charlie Johnson, some of y'all may know Charlie. He's fabulous. He's worked for years on fighting vouchers. That is their focus. But they have faith leaders of all denominations and all faith traditions that organize across the state of Texas and speak and fight vouchers. They'll come to your organization, your church. They'll come to your group and speak. You can just go on their website or follow them on Twitter, Facebook, whatnot. Get information. But I think sometimes when you can de-arm somebody, but let me tell you about my faith-based friends that are also trying to fight Christian nationalism. Because as faith people, Christian nationalism doesn't just attack our democracy, it attacks Christianity, right? It breaks the integrity of Christianity. So anybody who is already an activist within that space will tell you, if we want to protect the integrity of American Christianity or Christianity anywhere, but we're dealing with America, we have to fight Christian nationalism. And I'll tell you, the folks at the BJC have fabulous messaging about that, and you can get a lot of bumper sticker type things that you can share with friends or family or whomever you're trying to have this kind of conversation with. And Chris and I understand it's a hard conversation to have. And we definitely lost some relationships. And when you're talking about it and you're going to friends and family, you kind of have to go into it knowing it might cost me something. But what we all gain from having those conversations is well worth it in the end, we feel like. So thank you all for having us.
So thank you both very much for coming. We really appreciate it. This was great. If you enjoyed this, we have programs like this every month. Last month we covered the propositions and learned what they were about and what to vote for. In January, we're skipping the meeting in December in favor of a Christmas party. So in January, we are having Christy Wood. She's going to talk about how Denton County runs elections. And in February, surprise candidates, we're having a primary candidate forum, and as well as a presenter to come talk to us about how to run for office, because we can't win if we don't run. So really important things coming up. Fun things coming up. We have a breakfast this Saturday. We have one every third Saturday, or the Saturday after the meeting, and this time it's going to be at First Watch over on Justin. Go about 9 a.m. and you're just hanging out with people that have the same values that you have. We have First Fridays at Taco Ocho. It starts at about 5:30. So please come on out for that and join us. It's a lot of fun. Lots of times Colleen's boyfriend will be playing and her daughter will be singing. That's fun. And finally, we have our Christmas party coming up on the 10th of December.
10th of December at Gabrielle and Sophia's.
Yes, at Gabrielle and Sophia's. 4 to 7, yes. So in closing, first of all, I want to say thank you to Gina Daly, who co-sponsored this with us. Thank you to Celia for all of your support and running this. I'd be remiss if we don't do this all by ourselves. It takes a lot of people, so I want to just recognize our leadership team: Mariah Martinez, Colleen Black, well, we met Michelle, but she left anyway, and Laura Haynes, and Antonello Longo. And the people that couldn't be here, David Stanaway, unfortunately couldn't make it, Vaughn Monroe and Andrew Sanders had but they're also part of this team and helped out with this effort. So thank you. Please look us up on Facebook. Please follow us. And I just want to close with what everybody else is saying. There's only one way we're taking the state back. There's only one way we're getting out of what's happening with the schools and Abbott, and that's to vote. And not just vote, but you met several candidates here. Go talk to them, join one of their campaigns, and join us, because we will be supporting these candidates after the primaries. We'll be out every weekend. Michelle will be organizing block walks and meet and greets and whatever we can do to get people elected. But you need to come out and support them too with us. And you need to make sure you vote and tell everyone around you to vote. And be sure and talk to your neighbors, because even if you think they're Republican, they don't understand Democratic values. If they did, they'd be Democrats. All right, thank you. Oh, by the way, we can use help if you want to help us put away the chairs. We've got to get them put away.